So after 2002's Halloween Resurrection, which wasn't the greatest movie in the series, I was very eager for more Halloween and more Michael Myers, and it would take 5 years until that came to pass, and that was in the form of 2007's Halloween, the remake version by Rob Zombie. I was very disappointed to find out that the next movie was going to be a remake of the original, and I wasn't a huge fan of this movie when it came out. I maybe have gotten a little less critical of it over the years. It's still not my favorite. It does a lot different from the original movie, where the other movie had a lot of vagueness that left a lot to the imagination. This movie tries to explain all that in a different way, and it just really, for me, overcomplicate things. I will be reviewing the unrated director's cut version of the film, and so let's start discussing. As always, if you haven't seen this movie, please be aware that this review will be containing spoilers. We start this movie with a young Michael Myers. He's a little bit older at the start of this movie than at the original. In the original movie, he was 6 years old, and the start of this movie, he is 10 years old. He is in a unhappy home situation. It's very clear that his house life is not very good. His mother works as a stripper, and she has a boyfriend who doesn't work and seems to be drunk and sits around the house and doesn't do anything and doesn't treat anybody in the house very well, including the mother's children. Older sister Judith does not seem to treat Michael very well, makes fun of him here and there, and there's a baby in the house, which is young Lori, and she's too young to really be much of a factor, though Michael does seem to show affection for her right away. Michael's already wearing a mask, a clown mask. Of course, this is Halloween Day. And Michael heads to school where we find out that he is being bullied by some other kids. A fight breaks out in the bathroom, and the kids are making fun of his mother for being a stripper, and the principal breaks it up. Michael insults the principal and gets taken to the office. His mother gets called down to the office, and she's not happy about this. But this is where we meet Sam Loomis, meeting him at a much earlier point in the film. He's been called in to evaluate Michael because they found a dead cat in his backpack, and they also found pictures of various other small animals that he's killed. Dr. Loomis warns the mother that this could be a sign of greater problems down the road, and they need to evaluate Michael right away. Michael takes off from the school and follows his bully back into the woods, and he beats his bully to death with a tree branch, hitting him over and over again until he's eventually dead. Back at the house, his mother's leaving for her shift of work. The boyfriend continues to taunt Michael, and Sister Judith is supposed to take Michael trick or treating, but she chooses not to, instead chooses to stay and hang out with her boyfriend and tells him to go alone. We see Michael sitting out on the street and he looks sad. He's waiting, watching other kids going by trick or treating. Eventually, he goes back inside and he sits at the table and eats some candy, and then he finally sets into motion. He gets some duct tape and duct tapes the boyfriend Ronnie to his recliner chair and then cuts his throat, killing him. Judith's boyfriend comes downstairs to make himself a sandwich. While he's there, Michael sneaks up behind him and hits him over the head with a baseball bat several times, killing him. He then heads upstairs to Judith's room, where he finds the mask that Judith's boyfriend had been wearing. Now, this is the traditional Michael Myers mask, so he gets it at a much younger age in this movie. He puts it on. Judith tries to get him to say what he's doing in her room, but he doesn't. He just stabs her in the stomach. She stumbles down to the hallway trying to get away, but Michael follows her and stabs her several more times until she's dead. He goes into the baby's room and just says Happy Halloween. The mother comes home from work to find Michael sitting out on the front porch with the baby. She takes the baby and goes in to discover what's been done. So right off the bat, it's a little more grisly situation. We try to give a little bit of background showing Michael's unhappy life, and we see that he's done more. Instead of just having killed his sister on Halloween night as a child, he on this day has killed a total of four people: a bully, his stepfather, his sister, and his sister's boyfriend. So after this, Michael is charged with first-degree murder and he is sent to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, where he is placed under the immediate care of Dr. Loomis, who begins immediately trying to evaluate Michael and wants to help him. Michael doesn't talk to him much and is very unhappy there and says he wants to go home several times. His mother comes to visit and Michael asks her if he can go home and she tells him not yet, but she'll talk to the doctor about it. And as Michael continues at various occasions to ask when he's going to go home, the doctor says, "You can't go home. You've done terrible things." He also, at one point, tells him that it's not going to happen, him going home anytime soon. Michael begins to construct masks in the asylum where he begins to hide behind these masks. He doesn't want people to see his face, and he begins to disappear inward, talking less and less to Dr. Loomis. One day, when left with a nurse, the nurse insults him, and Michael kills her by stabbing her with a fork. And after this, we see back at her home, his mother decides to take her own life. And after this, Michael doesn't speak for 15 years. He's an adult now at the asylum, and he is enormous. Michael's grown and just to a monster-sized person. It's different from the original movie because Michael has incredible strength in the original movies and does incredible things, but he's kind of average sized. In this movie, he has grown into a bit of a behemoth. He still wears his masks. He's still making his masks. His cell is covered in dozens of his masks that he's made over the years. We see a guard who has befriended Michael, or at least thinks he has. He gets along with Michael because he treats him with respect, and another new guard who tries to insult Michael, and the other guard warns him not to. At this point, Dr. Loomis tells Michael that he feels he's done all he can for him and he is not going to be his doctor anymore, not going to be coming to see him anymore, so he leaves. And we find out that Dr. Loomis has written a book about Michael and how he thinks he is a form of pure evil, a pure psychopathic killer with no remorse and who won't stop at anything. Back at the asylum, we see how Michael escapes Smith's Grove this time, which was never shown fully in the original movie. And it's a pretty bad reason. It's really due to bad staffing and negligence. We have two guards who have come into the sanitarium at night, and their plan is to rape a woman who is a new patient. And they decide to try to do this for whatever reason in Michael's room. They take the girl in there and begin to assault her, and they start to touch Michael's masks. I don't know if Michael just gets tired of them being there, sees the opportunity, gets mad that they touched his masks, gets mad about the girl, but Michael kills these two guards. One of them he slams up against a wall, then throws through a table, then fights the other one out into the hallway and smashes his head against the wall. Now, then there are multiple deaths here that we don't see on camera. We see Gloria, the receptionist, he kills her. We see her sitting there with her throat cut open, but we don't see Michael do it. When the guard who had been on good terms with Michael comes in, he sees two other dead guards on the floor. In this version of the movie, we don't see how these two guards were killed, just that they're laying dead. He turns around and comes face to face with Michael and tells him, "We just need to get you back to your room, Michael. Don't cause any trouble." He tries to cuff him, but Michael takes him and begins shoving his head into a sink full of water as the guard says he was good to Michael all these years, but Michael is remorseless and doesn't care. He sees just him as another one of his captors. He forces his head underwater several times, throws him on the ground, and then crushes his head with a TV set. So Michael heads out, and the alarms are sounded that he's escaped the sanitarium. They warn Dr. Loomis, who says he's on his way to try to help. Michael makes his way to a truck stop where a truck driver named Grizzly Joe has stopped with his truck. He goes into the bathroom. Michael goes in. Now, Grizzly Joe's a very large man as well, similar to Michael's size. So Michael breaks down the bathroom door. They get into a fight, and Michael kills him by stabbing him in the bathroom stall, and he steals his jumpsuit, giving Michael his familiar blue jumpsuit. Now, here's where things in the movie start to become much more familiar and kind of fall in line with similar themes of the original movie. We see Laurie Strode at her house. She is heading out for her school day, and just as in the original movie, her father is asking her to drop something off at the Myers house because there are people coming by to view it later in the day. She agrees and goes. Now, Michael has already made his way back to the Myers house, and he goes up to the attic where he had hidden under the floorboards the mask, which is now showing signs of wear and damage from being stored, and probably some dry rot from just being stored under the floorboards for the last several years, really 15 plus years. And the kitchen knife he had used was also stored there as well. On her way to the house, Lori comes across Tommy Doyle and they have a discussion. And they get to the house and Lori drops off the documents in the mail slot. Now, Michael sees her and immediately begins following her. At school, we see Lori with her friends Linda and Annie. It's worth noting that Annie is played by Danielle Harris, making her return to the Halloween franchise. Danielle Harris had played Jamie Lloyd in Halloween's 4 and 5, so it's fun to see her make a return to the franchise. As the group heads home for the day, they talk about their plans and we meet Sheriff Brackett, who is Annie's father, pulls up, gives her a ride home. The three girls on their way had seen Michael and had called out to him, and he walks away. Linda then heads on her way, and Lori heads home, Michael following close behind, keeping an eye on her. Dr. Loomis arrives at Smith Grove and he gets into an argument with the administration there, basically saying that all they had to do was keep Michael locked up until he died, and they failed to do that. And the scene is very reminiscent to the original movie. He says that whatever precautions they've taken, a roadblock and an APB wouldn't stop a 5-year-old. And he says that they need to warn them. He heads out and he warns them that Michael is heading back to Haddonfield. And so that's where Dr. Loomis is going to try to stop him. On his way, Dr. Loomis does stop to get himself a gun because he knows he's going to need it. He buys a 357 Magnum. We also see that once Dr. Loomis arrives in town, just like in the original movies, he goes to the graveyard, and Judith Myers' gravestone has been stolen, just as it was in the original movie. We get a little bit of a change up in the order. Linda and Bob are killed, but not in the same place. They went to Lindsay's house in the original movie, but instead in this movie they go together to the Myers house, where they've been using to hook up because it's abandoned. They go inside not knowing that Michael's there, and they die in similar fashion to the original movie. After sleeping together, Bob goes to get Linda a drink and runs into Michael along the way. Michael stabs him, pinning him up against the wall. And then he steals a costume. He puts a sheet over his head with Bob's glasses over the top of it and enters the room, gives Linda her beer, but when she turns around, Michael takes off the sheet and strangles Linda to death and then carries her body onward. Lori is picked up by Annie. They're both going to babysit. Lori's going to babysit Tommy Doyle, and Annie is going to babysit Lindsay. They have a plan that she will drop Lindsay over with Lori and Tommy so that she can meet up with her boyfriend Paul and they can go back to Lindsay's house. After she's picked up, we see Michael go in and kill Lori's parents, the Strodes. He kills the father out on the front porch by cutting his throat and then goes in. And then holding a picture up of Lori to the mother, I guess trying to perhaps gather information or confirm who she is or just show his anger, he eventually kills the mother. We don't see exactly how, although it sounds like her neck snaps at one point. And then we are to their plan that we discussed earlier. Annie does take Lindsay across the street and drops her off with Tommy and Lori, and then she goes back with her boyfriend to Lindsay's house. As they are hooking up together, Michael comes in and quickly kills the boyfriend by stabbing him. And then Michael chases down Annie, grabs her, attacks her, but doesn't kill her in this movie, which is different from the original movie. He drags her off and lays her at the foot of the stairs. Now, Lori, realizing that it's now time to take Lindsay home, starts walking across the street with her, leaving Tommy back at his house. They arrive at the house and see that Annie is a bloody mess laying at the bottom of the stairs. She sends Lindsay back, says to call the police, and she runs off to the kitchen to try to call the police herself. Now, as this was happening, Dr. Loomis had already been in town, and he had met with Sheriff Brackett, was trying to warn him that there was danger in town, that there was evil in town. Michael Myers is here and needed to be stopped. Sheriff Brackett is critical at first, but then does try to start to help. They start heading towards the Strode house when they fail to get an answer there. At Lindsay's house, after Lori had walked off to the kitchen to call the police, Michael comes out from behind the door. He walks past Annie, who sees him and kind of looks where he'd hung up Annie's boyfriend in a fashion hanging from the ceiling with a pumpkin on his head. He kind of stares at it, kind of pushes it, and then walks off through the house. Annie begins calling out, trying to warn Lori of what's happening, but it doesn't work. Michael comes in, finds her in the kitchen, and starts following her. She eventually breaks out the back door and retreats, and Michael follows, heading back across the street towards Tommy Doyle's house. Now, the 911 call was related to Sheriff Brackett, and Loomis says he's found her, so they start heading off towards the call to see if they can get there in time to be of help. Lori makes it back across the street, and Tommy lets her in just in time for Michael to arrive at the door and start trying to attack his way in. They run upstairs and hide in the bathroom. The police do arrive and come inside, and they're searching the house. One of the cops is outside the bathroom door asking them if they can open it. Lori, Lindsay, and Tommy were all still hiding in the tub. Lori goes to try to open the door, but Michael, still being in the house, kills the first cop by stabbing him up against the door. And then the second cop comes in, tries to shoot Michael. Looks like he hits him at least once, but Michael charges over and kills him, stabbing him to death too. He then comes back and kidnaps Lori, carrying her off as she is now unconscious. Sheriff Brackett and Dr. Loomis arrive on the scene. They come to Lindsay's house and they find Annie in, again, horrible condition, laying at the bottom of the stairs. Sheriff Brackett, this being his daughter, tries to start helping her right away. Dr. Loomis outside sees Tommy and Lindsay come running up, saying the boogeyman had stolen Lori. He tells them to wait by the ambulance and he starts going in pursuit. Not sure how he knows exactly where to go, but he does. Probably assumes Michael's going back to his house, so he heads there. Back at the house in the basement, Lori awakens in a room. We see a jack-o'-lantern, we see Judith Myers' headstone, and we see Linda dead laying in front of it. Michael enters the room and kneels down in front of Lori, dropping his knife, and shows her the picture of them together as children, her as a baby, him as a child. She doesn't, of course, doesn't recognize this picture. She was never told about the history of her family. She doesn't know that Michael Myers is her brother, so she's just scared and trying to figure her way out. Michael even has removed his mask at this point. She gets close, trying to tell him that she wants to help, but she doesn't know what he wants. When she gets close enough, she grabs the knife and stabs Michael in the shoulder and takes off. Now, she has a lot of hindrances because as she's trying to get out, there's various locked doors. She breaks her way through one, breaks her way through a fence. Michael recovers, dons his mask again, and begins breaking through walls in pursuit. Lori makes it up into the yard, but immediately trips into an empty pool and is kind of stuck. Michael kind of has her cornered as he's walking. He starts to descend into the pool as Dr. Loomis finds them. He tells Michael to stop. Michael doesn't, and Dr. Loomis begins to fire shots at him, still trying to get him to stop. Now he fires a total of 3 shots into Michael's back, and this has Michael down, at least for the moment. He comes down and helps Lori out of the pool and takes her around to the front of the house and into a police cruiser and helps her to sit. And at this point, we get another line from the original movie. She says, "Was that the boogeyman?" And Dr. Loomis says, "Yes, he believes it was." But at this point, Michael's not done. He breaks the window of the police car, grabs Lori and drags her out, and begins dragging her into the house. Dr. Loomis pursues and tells Michael he needs to stop. It's not her fault. He says it's his fault. He let Michael down. Michael lets Lori go for the moment and then attacks Dr. Loomis, squeezing his head and dropping him, and then drags him into the house. Lori's hidden in the walls, and Michael starts breaking through the walls, looking for her. She breaks out and starts running up the stairs. Dr. Loomis tries to slow Michael down briefly. He's still alive. He grabs Michael around the leg, but can only hold him for a few moments until Michael just keeps going and he's too weak and has to let go. Lori's now hiding in the ceiling, in kind of like the attic, and Michael starts breaking the ceiling, trying to again get to her. They find themselves in a face-off in the attic. She has Dr. Loomis's gun and she's going to shoot, but Michael kind of tackles her and they both collapse out through the roof and onto the lawn. Lori wakes up. She's hurt, covered in blood, and she seems to have survived probably because she landed on top of Michael, who absorbed most of the fall, breaking the fall for her. Michael seems to be unconscious. She still has the gun. She points it at Michael's face and begins to try to fire the gun. And Michael grabs her wrists when she finally does successfully fire the gun. And her face is splattered with blood, and she begins to scream, and the movie ends with her screaming. It is worth noting that there is also an alternate ending that was quite different. It picks up at the scene where Dr. Loomis and Laurie are sitting in the squad car and Michael comes and grabs her. That's the same, except Michael doesn't make it all the way into the house. He's standing in the front yard when Dr. Loomis is trying to talk him down, saying again it's not her fault, it's his fault. All the police pull up and are telling Michael to drop his weapon, led by Sheriff Brackett, and Loomis tells them to stop. He can handle this. And again, he's telling Michael, you need to stop. Laurie says, Michael, please let me go. And Michael actually does. He drops his knife, lets her go, and Dr. Loomis starts to walk away. Now, Michaels begins to pursue. We don't know if just following or if he's trying to make an attack on Dr. Loomis, but the police force open fire, and Michael is shot down by all of the Haddonfield police officers who are there. He's left laying, Dr. Loomis kneeling at his side, and we get the sound of Dr. Loomis talking to him as a child from the beginning of the movie to close this out in the alternate ending. All for all, I think the original ending that made it into the movie was the better option. So the main difference between the 1978 Halloween film and this 2007 remake is that Rob Zombie attempts to be much more elaborate with what got Michael to the point of coming back on Halloween night. In the original movie, it's relatively quick. We see Michael kills his sister as a child. We know he's in Smith's Grove. We see him escape and he's on his way back. They stretch that all out much, much broader. For one thing, we try to give Michael a bit of a tragic backstory here. We say he had a very bad childhood. He had problems with his mother's boyfriend, with his older sister, being bullied at school, just a whole kind of backstory showing that he was headed in a bad direction. And they try to show that he was headed down a bad path by the fact that he was hurting and killing small animals at a young age, which is a typical sign that someone is on their way to becoming a psychopath, or that they already are. They give this much more tragic backstory. They also show that he killed way more people. They kind of overdo it in this movie a little bit because in the original movie, Michael killed one person and then was put away. In this movie, in one day, he's killed four. So it ups the ante a little bit there, showing a lot darker side to him. And they show that in the hospital he is talking. In the original movie, it basically makes it seem like Michael stopped talking immediately after the events of killing his sister on Halloween night 1963. In this movie, when he gets to the hospital, he's talking to Dr. Loomis and he progressively backs off, progressively begins to shield himself inside his own mind and behind his masks and starts talking to Loomis less and less as he becomes more and more upset and darker about where he is, and he realizes that he's not going to be able to get out of this place and go home. His time as Smith's Grove is much more elaborated as well, and as well as his escape. We don't really see in 1978's Halloween how Michael gets out of the sanitarium. When Dr. Loomis pulls up, he's already out. He's wandering around outside. He manages to steal the car and get away. In this one, we see that it's a very bloody affair. He kills multiple guards and other staff to get his break his way out of the asylum. And like the other movie, in the other movie he killed a mechanic to get his jumpsuit. This one he kills a truck driver. Very similar there. And the other main difference is the how he gets the mask. In the other movie, he just stole it from a local store. In this movie, it's something that he's been planning since he was a kid. He got the mask because his sister's boyfriend had brought it into the house, and he hides it after wearing it there and comes back for it all these years later. Rob Zombie just tries to be a lot more elaborate in this movie, as we've discussed. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. I don't know if it works in anybody's favor. I think the vagueness works in a lot of people's favor for the original movie. In the original movie, we have no idea why Michael chose to kill his sister. In this movie, he killed her and other people, seemingly that he just had enough and he kind of snapped. We see that Judith wasn't very nice to him throughout the movie that she was in, and of course, the stepfather or mother's boyfriend wasn't very nice to him at all. And so he snapped and he killed everybody in the house that night except for the younger sister, the baby, who did not ever do anything to him and perhaps was one of the few pieces of happiness in his young life. And it's also interesting to note that at Smith's Grove, Michael either didn't or pretended not to remember having killed anybody at the house. He tells Dr. Loomis he didn't do that, and he even asks his mother how everybody at home is doing. We also know that his mother took her own life. We don't know if Michael knows about that. I'm sure Dr. Loomis probably did tell him, and that probably didn't contribute to anything because now he doesn't have anybody from the outside except Dr. Loomis coming to visit him. In the end, much like what they tried to do with Halloween's 5 and 6, I just think they overcomplicate things here. It seems like Rob Zombie's trying to get in Michael Myers' head and explain why he is the way he is, and I just don't think that needs to be done. We don't need it explained. In the other movie, Michael is just the shape. He is just a purely evil killing machine that has chosen a time to go back and finish what he started. And that's it. He's a killing machine. That's all he needs to be. We don't need to understand the inner workings of the mind of Michael Myers. In fact, trying to do that kind of normalizes him, and we don't want a normalized Michael Myers. We want a vicious killing machine Michael Myers. We don't need sympathy on Michael Myers' side. I don't know if the movie was trying to do that, perhaps give him sympathy, showing his a bit of a tragic backstory leading up to the events of the movie. I just think it overcomplicates things, and all in all, it's not needed, and that's why I really was never that big of a fan of this particular installment of the franchise. We're also given a lot more screen time with Dr. Loomis in this movie, played by Malcolm McDowell in this new version of the character. He's introduced to Michael Myers at a younger age, before Michael does the killing, but before he gets a chance to really try to intervene and help Michael, Michael does his killings, and the doctor is then assigned to him to try to see if he can be of help. And we do see Dr. Loomis in this movie does seem to care about Michael. He tries to help him, is trying to get him to open up. We don't know if he'll ever be able to get him freed, and he don't know if he really wants to get him freed because after working with him for a long time, he sees Michael closing up. He thinks that he is fully insane. And we do see after a long period of time of working with Michael that he does eventually call it quits and decide that he can't do anything anymore. Now, this is also a little bit different than the original movie because it seemed like Dr. Loomis was still working to keep Michael locked up in the original movie. In fact, in the original movie, he was going to Smith's Grove to pick up Michael to take him to court so that he could testify on the fact that Michael should not ever be released. In this movie, the doctor had moved on. He had written a book about Michael and had moved on to other things. But when the call comes in that Michael had escaped and there's trouble, he does rise to the occasion and come back to try to stop this person that he does still feel some responsibility for. Malcolm McDowell does play a decent Dr. Loomis. It's hard to really play an iconic character in a remake because instantly everybody is going to judge you for being this new character. They're going to judge you based on the original character. And Donald Pleasance was a wonderful Dr. Loomis, and he did it for multiple movies. So Malcolm McDowell immediately has big shoes to fill, but I do think he does a fine job and plays the part of Sam Loomis very well. I always like to take a moment to discuss Michael's mask, and the mask is okay in this movie. It's not great. It is just kind of more generic than the previous masks in the last couple of movies. It looks like the Michael Myers mask. It just, like I said, looks a little more generic. I don't enjoy this mask very much. There have been much better ones in different points in the franchise. I do like it a little bit better after Michael retrieves it from the floorboards. It actually looks a little bit better and a little bit more menacing with the weathered look after it's been sitting for several years in a dry spot where it's got some dry rot and other things going on with it. Overall, not my favorite mask, but not the worst by far. Now, Rob Zombie does decide to go with a much higher kill count. In the original movie, Michael only killed 5 people throughout the entire movie. In this movie, there is some variation based on the unrated director's cut and the theatrical version. In the unrated director's cut that I'm reviewing here, Michael kills a total of 19. His mother does kill herself in this movie, but that is not a Michael related kill. So, to review Michael's kills again in this movie, first he kills his school bully as a child, Wesley Rhodes. He beats him to death with a tree branch. He then kills his mother's boyfriend, Ronnie, by cutting his throat. He kills his sister's boyfriend, Steve, by bashing him several times in the head with an aluminum baseball bat. He kills his sister Judith by stabbing her several times. He kills a nurse in Smith's Grove by stabbing her with a fork. Then, when he is breaking out of the sanitarium, he kills 2 security guards by bashing both their heads into different walls. He kills Gloria, the receptionist, by having her throat ripped out, although this wasn't shown on screen. He kills 2 other workers unknown that are discovered by Emmanuel Cruz, and then he kills Emmanuel Cruz by shoving his head in the sink several times and then smashing his head with a television. He kills Joe Grizzly by stabbing him in the stomach in the truck stop bathroom. He kills Bob Sims by um, he kills Bob Sims by stabbing him and pinning him up against the wall. He kills Landa by strangling her. He kills the 2 Strode parents. He kills Mason Strode, the father, by slicing him with a kitchen knife. He kills Cynthia by slamming her into a table and snapping her neck. He kills Paul by stabbing him in the chest, and then he kills the 2 police officers in the end by stabbing them both several times. This movie did receive some mixed reviews. Over on Rotten Tomatoes, it got a 28% pretty low score by critics, but it did get a bit of a higher score with audiences, up to a 59% with audience scores. Both rotten scores, but not as bad as some of the other movies. On IMDb, this one is given a 6.0 out of 10. As I've stated, this movie wasn't one of my favorites, and it's largely because it's a remake. It's a great movie in the original form and didn't need to be remade, but I give this movie a 5 out of 10. Thanks for listening to this review of 2007's Halloween. This is not, again, a high point for me in the series. I don't think the original movie needed to be remade, but they went for it, and this is what we got. Please let me know your thoughts on this movie in the comments section, and be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Next, we'll be reviewing H2 Halloween, the sequel follow-up to Rob Zombie's Halloween, again made by Rob Zombie, and that video will be coming soon.